하겠습니다. 이해해 주세요. Okay. So I think we all live in sort of an unfortunate irony, which is that some of the biggest problems that we all know about, don't feel real to us. Problems like resource depletion, problems like deforestation, and climate change. They don't feel real. What feels real is the things that we run into every day, worrying about waking up on time, paying the bills, the happiness and welfare of our friends and family. But if we want to make progress as a society on fixing the big issues, if we want to build a sustainable and a just culture, we all need to be thinking about more. So my question is, how do we make these things feel real to us? I think everyone is different, clearly. There's no one way to make it happen. We all have different paths, we all have different interests, we all have different talents, we all have different capabilities. So I'd like to take this opportunity to just tell you about my own story. So this is me about 3 years ago in Cambodia. The guy next to me is Chanta. He's 21 years old. He's a high school student, and he was also my taxi driver at the temples of Angkor Wat. And so he would drive me back and forth every day between my hostel and the temples. And while doing this, we obviously got pretty close, because it's not a Korean taxi where you're several feet away from the driver. It's a moped, so I was almost sitting on his lap. And as we got close, we started hanging out together. This is a picture of us after dinner, where we had deep-fried frog and red ant stir-fry. It was fantastic. We also took a trip out to an English school where he was volunteering. He taught me his favorite joke, which is that he wants to go find someone, go somewhere, and do something. I'll let you figure out what that means. And he also invited me back to his village, where I got to harvest rice with him and his family. I got to go for a swim in the river. I got to poke coconuts out of trees, chop them up with a machete, and eat them fresh. And I also got to eat fish that his father had caught out of the river. And the whole time, everyone in his community was really giving to me. They didn't ask anything. They were just happy to share and happy to be in my presence. And that felt really great. And I understood why Chanta didn't want to live in the city, why he wanted to stay in the village he had grown up in, and why he liked his life there. But as a traveler, I had to continue moving on. And the next thing I did was take a boat trip towards another city called Battambang. And on the boat trip, I would pass villages like this, sort of similar to Chanta's, not idyllic, but pastoral, people living a simple agricultural subsistence level existence. And they were still really happy despite not having much by our standards. I would see children running out in the river. As our boat passed by, the children would come out. They would scream at us, smile, and their smiles would grow even bigger when we responded, when we greeted them. As we passed this part, we got to another area where the fishermen had built piers. And instead of fishing by going out directly in the boats, at the end of the piers, they had built these nets. And they would sink the nets into the river, nets suspended on big cranes. They'd sink them into the river and pull them up with a lot more fish. So these were ways of increasing the amount of fish they could catch, and their methods of improving their livelihood. But our boat was so big, and the river was so small, that several times we nearly crashed into these things. And eventually, we did crash into one. We didn't destroy it, but we did some damage. And I still remember the guilt and the shame and the embarrassment that I felt while watching these fishermen sort of grimace and hope that we wouldn't run into their crane. But we didn't. And I realized at that point that there was some sort of paradox in my traveling, which is that I had come to see and to learn, and actually I was destroying something. I was hurting these people that I just wanted to learn about. There was nothing I could do about it at that point, though. I was just on the boat. And as we continued, we passed another village like this, except it was covered in plastic. Right? Plastic bottles, plastic bags, plastic wrappers, and piles of burning plastic because they had no way to get rid of it. And all of the lettering on the plastic was in Cambodian, but clearly the plastic and the products and the mindset behind it was Western. It was from countries like mine. And at that point I realized that not only is the money I'm spending in Cambodia having an effect on these people, but the money I spend at home does too. If you buy a soft drink, the company makes money, they make a profit, they reinvest it, they expand their operations, they find ways to sell these things abroad, but they don't find ways to clean up after themselves. There's no profit in that. So I realized I don't want to have this effect on people. And I was still unemployed. I still had to continue traveling. But I wanted to do it the right way without having these sort of nasty effects. So I decided then and there that I would not buy any more disposable products. I try not to throw anything out and try to leave the country intact so that people after me could also see and enjoy it. While moving along, while traveling, I read a couple of books. The first one here is about the history of a lot of the foods that we put into our body. And the second is about the trajectory of things that we throw out. And both of them sort of had the effect of showing me that despite having learned in college how to read Italian poetry and how to draw supply and demand graphs, I still didn't even know basic details about food and other objects that were coming in and out of my life. For example, I didn't know that in the case of something like a plastic bottle, about 1% of the damage done to the environment happens after it's passed through your hands, after you've thrown it out. The other 99% happens before it even gets to you, when the necessary materials are being extracted from the earth, when they're being processed in plants, and when they're being transported to you. I also didn't know that it takes about 15,500 liters of water to get 1 kilogram of beef for us to eat. Nor did I know that that 1 kilogram of beef will most likely travel about 1,500 miles to get to your plate if you're an American. So the process of raising all the food that goes into the beef and then transporting the beef winds up taking about 10 calories of fossil fuel energy for just 1 calorie of food energy. Finally, A4 looks just like the size of a piece of paper, but it's also the size of the area on which most egg-laying chickens will spend their entire life, without the ability to move around, certainly without the ability to fly, and without the ability to even be a real chicken. So these are all ways that, without thinking about it, I was, affecting people, other animals, the environment, and future generations. And yet, I would get angry when someone overcharged me for a taxi ride in Cambodia, even if it was a matter of cents. And I realized at this point that there was this giant gulf between sort of what I imagined my effects on the world were and what the actual effects were. And also sort of, I wanted to be a nice guy. And no matter what your standard of that is, if you're Christian and you think you ought to love your neighbor, if you're a Buddhist and you want to reduce the total amount of suffering in the world, or, like I said, if you just want to be a nice guy by general standards, that means keeping in mind at all times the effects that you're having on other people as if they were your brother or your neighbor. So knowing what I did know now about the effects of trash and the effects of meat consumption and other things, I made some promises to myself in order to sort of live in line with my values. The first one was, I'm not going to own a car, which was easy enough because I was a tourist and a backpacker already. The second one was, I'm not going to buy anything new if I can avoid it. So actually all the clothes I'm wearing today, you can probably already tell, are used. And if they're not used, they've got holes in them. And in the case of my shirt, both are true. In addition to that, I decided not to eat any meat. So I went vegetarian, and then I went vegan, and as much as possible I went organic and local. But I was still employed, and I was still traveling. And I wanted to keep traveling, but this time without feeling like a consumer, and without feeling like I was destroying the very things I had come to learn about. So that desire took me here. This is a place called Sadhana Forest. It's in southern India. It's an eco-commune, and the main work they do is reforestation and water conservation. So every morning we would wake up, we would go out to the forest, we would do some landscape work to prevent topsoil loss, and we would also plant trees when the season is right. And then during the day, we would enjoy each other's company, we would play games, we would take care of the community. But the whole time, we would try to be mindful of numbers like the ones that I mentioned before. And what that meant was that, first of all, everyone followed a vegan diet. Second of all, we used renewable energy from the solar panels that we had installed. And third, we tried not to use anything disposable, which means no plastic, and even something like human waste. You think it's disgusting, you think you need to get it as far away from you as possible. We turned that into a resource. We composted it. And if you ever see a picture of me standing on top of a 10-foot pile of human manure, you'll know why. But this effort of ours towards independence and self-sustainability didn't mean an effort to be isolated. So in addition to everything else, we took bicycle trips to nearby villages where we helped the villagers clean up all of the plastic that was spread out, just like in Cambodia, and we gave them strategies for reducing plastic use in the future. Finally, we also did movie nights where we would invite upwards of 300 or 400 people from the area to come. We would watch a movie together, and afterwards, the people who were living in the community would cook a vegan meal and offer it for free to all 300 or 400 guests. So, we would go the spiritual route and also the very physical route in terms of explaining to people what we're doing and why. And eventually I did find a job, and my visa ran out in India, and I decided to come back to Korea. But I didn't want to lose the momentum I had built up. I wanted to continue living this way. So I did come back to Korea, and I continued with the movie nights. I know it's not 400 people, but it is more than the 5 people that attended the first movie night I did, especially if you consider among those 5 people, 3 rode with me in the taxi to the cafe. 1 was the cafe's owner, and 1 was her 4-year-old daughter. So this is the most recent movie night. It's about 20 people. We had an organic meal together at Biche, a restaurant here that supports only local organic farmers. And we also watched a movie about vegetarianism afterwards. And everyone had a chance to sort of build community and talk together and just enjoy each other's company. And this is one of several things I did. I wanted to include this aspect of environmentally friendly living in my life in as many ways as possible, and I wanted to share it with others. So I put a name on this effort. This name is Daegu Green Living, or Nokseksari Daegu. And it was a little weird to put a name on it at first because it was just me and my bicycle and my camera. The first thing I decided to do was to try to expand the vegetarian scene here, because I remember leaving India very concerned about whether I'd be able to keep it up. If you look at a map online of Daegu vegetarian restaurants, you'll see that it looks like there's absolutely nothing. Looking at this, you might get the idea that you need to go to the Shinchan River and scrape some nasty moss off of rocks, or even head to Palgongsan and practice wild foraging, dig up some roots or something. But Daegu is not a vegetarian wasteland like this. Actually, it's a buffet. So if you live in Chilgok, if you live in Sangin, if you live in Shiji, if you live in Susang, if you live downtown, there are fantastic vegetarian, organic, temple food restaurants all over the place. All these baskets are also markets where you can buy local, seasonal, organic Korean food all throughout the year. There are also used goods shops, used furniture markets. There's tons of stuff out there. And people really wanted to know about it. This map is hardly 6 months old. It's got 25,000 views online already so far. The associated blog has 75 posts and about 15,000 views. There are 30 or 40 people coming to movie nights. There are 100 people on the Facebook group. And everything seems to be going well, even accelerating. So there's this thought that often sort of stops people in their tracks when they think about activism. What does one person matter? It's an important question. It's also kind of a funny question because we don't ask it all the time. So imagine you're at a concert. Your favorite band is playing. They're playing your favorite song. Everyone around you is clapping and jumping. You don't stop and think, does it matter if I clap too? You go ahead and clap because it's an expression of how you feel. And it's an expression of sort of your truth and your values. And I think you can look at activism the same way. You're not active for a reason. You do it just because it's who you are and what you believe in. I don't think you should fall into the trap of believing that you're just one person, that you're distant from everybody, that you're an island, or that you live in a vacuum. If you look at your body, it seems like it ends here. The people in the front row might know your odor extends a little further. After that, your voice. And then who knows how far you're visible from, but your influence goes further yet. You can imagine, for example, that you decide not to eat a hamburger. It's fantastic. You've saved an animal, you've saved trees, you've saved water, you've saved other valuable resources. And people around you will see that. But they'll not only see exactly what you've done, they'll see that you've done something. And they'll figure there must be a reason, right? It will set them thinking. You'll influence them somehow. So if you're poetic, if you're poetic-minded, you can think of yourself as maybe a dandelion. You have all these seeds that are ready to move around. If you're a little more cynical, you can think like you're infected with a virus, a very contagious green living virus. And you never know. These things are ready to move at any opportunity. You don't know who's going to catch it. You don't know where or when or how or why. But the fact is that if you move around, and do as you want, and do as you believe is right, people will observe it and it will catch on. In addition, it's not unpleasant to live this way. It feels good. Right? It feels good to do good. It feels good to help people, and it builds community. It's actually tremendously empowering to see that once you open up this way, other people respond, and you wind up meeting a million people doing the same thing that you didn't even know before. So I'd like to close with a quotation. 한 사람의 100보보다 만 명의 한 걸음이 더 의미 있지 않을까요? Wouldn't it be more meaningful if rather than one person taking 100 steps, 10,000 people each took one? So please take the first step. If you've already taken the first step, take a second and a third. You never know where the path will lead you. Thank you.